It's Red Eye Radio. Gary McNamara and Eric Harley talk about everything from politics to social issues and news of the day. Whether you're up late or you're just starting your day, welcome to the show. From the Uniden America Studios, this is Red Eye Radio.
That's right. We are. He's Eric Harley and I'm Gary McNamara. Good morning. All right, last hour we were talking about the proposed high-speed rail between Dallas and Houston. Trump administration pulled the grant of $64 million, said that's gone. If you don't live in Texas, really over the last 15 years, 16 years, this has been talked about, this proposal. Mm-hmm. And it was supposed to be purely private, totally and purely private. During the Biden administration, though, they decided to get Amtrak involved. And then they got a grant, a $64 million grant last year. They were looking for a public-private partnership, which was not at all what was sold to the residents and citizens of Texas at all.
No.
I mean, it was, no, we can do this. We can do it.
Right.
Private.
Right.
And all of a sudden, it's not private anymore.
Mm-hmm. And
so immediately, especially in the state of Texas, when stuff like this happens, people go, okay, this means subsidies. No, we can't do this. We can't do this. Mm-hmm. I mentioned that there was a House bill that was introduced on April 1st here that had said, okay, if you want to, you've got to reduce some of the roads to do this. You're not going to use taxpayer dollars to do it.
Right.
And so with the Trump administration pulling the funding, and, we've talked a lot in the past about, since there hasn't been much to talk about the California high-speed rail because it hasn't gone anywhere. Mm-hmm. But the comparison has been made. Will the Texas high-speed rail turn out to be the same thing? But with Amtrak pulling out, who knows what will happen? I had mentioned, though, that there was also, from what I heard, I haven't heard it in such a long time. It hasn't been promoted as much as it used to be, but there was apparently truck lanes that were supposed to run parallel to it, and you found out some of the info on that?
Yeah, these were truck-only lanes that this was the design, the idea was going to be, along that same route where you could basically cut through between Dallas and Houston. You could establish these lanes. Because if you think about the ports in Galveston, huge ports, that could be a big deal. But then they got into the cost of it, of course. And it was, for the initial lane, $2.5 million per mile was the estimate. And then to build 2 additional lanes, it was going to be a total of roughly $10 million per mile.
And that was 2019.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is massive inflation. And so when you look at that, that's just not feasible. Because, of course, you can't just build the one lane. It's got to be, you're going to have consideration for on-ramps, off-ramps, multiple lanes, for the fact that some trucks, based on the fleets, govern their trucks at different speeds. And so, there's a lot of consideration there. So one lane isn't going to get it done. So at $10 million per mile, it becomes astronomical. Then they got into, how could we pay for it? What about tolls? Well, the tolls would be on the trucks. Well, they pass that on to the consumer, right? And they actually thought about it and thought, could we actually, in certain zones, toll the cars too that aren't traveling in those lanes? Well, you're not going to get away with that. So they did away with that idea. They were like, yeah, that probably won't work. You're not going to toll somebody. You're not going to toll the driving public on lanes they can't access. And you're also not going to take the lanes that are already built for the driving public and dedicate those to truck only, because again, you would get outrage. It would be, this is
Right.
this isn't fair. Blah blah.
You're
blah.
not going to toll I-45 to pay for the truck.
Yeah, and so now the truck only lane. It got back to the truck only lanes tolls for trucking, and then they thought, oh no, because the balance would be in whether or not, again, to what extent can you pass that on to the shippers and receivers who pass it along to us. It's only to the point that the market will bear. It's something that expensive would be a pretty hard hit. The number one goal, I think, was really about safety, so that you had less interaction between the driving public and trucks. But ultimately, it's too expensive. You're just not. Most believe that it probably won't ever happen for that reason. And it's the part of the eminent domain thing is probably what quite likely started to build on the cost of that high-speed rail, because as you get further and further into the project, and you start on the eminent domain front, right? You got to buy up the land. Well, as you buy more and more land, that takes time, because there's a lawsuit for just about every piece of property that's purchased through eminent domain. People challenge that and say, well, that's not fair market value. I think this is fair market value, and I don't accept that as fair market value. It goes to court. Well, as you get further into that project, just average appreciation of land is going to increase the market value of that land, and that's going to apply to that eminent domain as you get further and further into it. And so I think now, wow, especially if you think about the cost of Texas land since 2009. Everybody says, well, it's all the billionaires moving here and buying up so much land. Actually, there's a lot of people moving here and buying up a lot of land. And 95 people may not know, but about 95% of the land in Texas is owned by private citizens. So it's privately owned property, which means, again, you're almost always going to have a court challenge, even on eminent domain actions that are required to build out such projects. And if you do that, you go through that, and the court costs and everything else start adding up more and more and more and more. And at some point, again, when the private sector says uncle, you call your Uncle Sam. They scream Uncle Sam in that case, and Amtrak moves in. It's inevitable. We I seem to remember, I could be wrong, this could be a false memory, but I don't think it is, us saying that. If they get to a point and the private sector is broken on it, you have enough liberals that would say, no, let's throw some money at it. Mm-hmm. And because that math would have been clear, and it is, with all, you look at Amtrak and the history of Amtrak, and the fact that it's not profitable, but we got to keep it going. And so there is this, sense where they, they'll tell you those proposing to add more money, more public money to this, or any project like this, it's always, well, we need it. Well, we need it. We need it.
I didn't see the outrage because I have a lot of people that I'm following in Texas government. I didn't see a lot of outrage even from Democrats yesterday, Texas Democrats, on pulling the funding from Amtrak.
They may know what we said before, that, okay, the private sector will hit the bench until the Democrats come back to power on the federal level.
Well, but
and we hope to, we hope to petition to bring it back.
But I'm talking about the fact that since Trump did it, it's automatically evil.
Oh, sure, yeah,
and has to be complete and total, incredible, insane outrage that by Trump canceling the Trump administration canceling the grant.
That's unconstitutional.
Well, no. They're killing babies.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay.
And you're saying, Gary, don't be ridiculous. The two don't match. Of course, that's my point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I just wonder what will happen now. When Amtrak came in 2023, I don't know if we talked about it on the air, but I know in my head, I went, this isn't going to work.
Mm-hmm.
Because I just knew that Amtrak, coming in, that there would be that push to get federal dollars in. You would lose, by bringing Amtrak in, a lot of the interest in private investment, because that's an admission we cannot make a profit.
Right, yeah.
And just knowing the fact that, with the bill that was introduced by the House, you knew there was opposition to this. There was a ton of opposition. I remember you and I talking about this going back years ago, because the whole point was, from people calling the show, was, well, this will make it a lot easier. I've got to wait at an airport. There's security. I can just jump on the train there, and I can be there in 90 minutes. And it's like, well, fine and dandy, maybe you can. But it's the cost per person traveling versus what you pay for your ticket that matters. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of great technology. Back when you and I started together 20 years ago, remember the hydrogen car?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the hydrogen car can do it. The hydrogen car, we know it can do it. Well, then why don't we use it? Because of the cost.
Mm-hmm.
Can't afford a $130,000 car.
Mm-hmm.
So the technology may be there, but that's not the key. The key is, what does it cost?
Right.
And by the way, prices do matter.
Well, and you're going to have competition. You already have competition with the airlines.
Mm-hmm.
And there are, I don't know how many flights between Dallas and Houston and vice versa every day. So you've got to compete with that, even with the fact that it might take longer to go to an airport, and go through the process. Well, but if it's cheaper, they'll still do it. And that's what it comes down to. What are people willing to pay? The curiosity factor will drive upfront money, because people will want to get on it just to experience the high-speed rail.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go NASCAR fast all the way to Houston.
I would do it.
Yeah.
Since I can't go up in space or near space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right.
Just since I can't go space adjacent.
Yeah. And, so beyond that, then it just becomes, again, what you can charge, what the public is willing to pay. And over time, if that changes, when the trend is gone and it just becomes a everyday occurrence, do people choose that? And based on the price, is it feasible to maintain? All of these, by the way, are unknown, because there are so many factors that go into that entire equation. Even in the private sector, you can do study after study after study, but after we go through a COVID, which we have since then, after we go through record inflation for a generation, which we have since then things change. In fact, that's about the timeline of Amtrak coming into the equation. So it tells you that the math wasn't there, or it changed along the way.
Well, I'm looking here. I can't even finish. It was over 30. It was like nonstop flights. That's just from DFW. I'm not even looking at
Love Field.
Yeah. There's over like 30 flights.
Right.
And there's a bunch of it's like well, there's a lot more. Oh, one stop. Well, that's a problem. That doesn't compete with the rail at that point if you have to make a stop before you go.
Yeah. Right.
Because there's like this one I'm looking at. Frontier Airlines from Dallas to from Dallas to Houston, one stop. Let me see.
Where's the stop at?
See the total flight. 26 hours and 10 minutes.
They go to Atlanta for overnight, then come back. Yeah.
What's LAS?
I don't know.
Vegas. So you have to go from Dallas to Vegas and back to
Wait
to
a minute.
Houston.
Hold on a second. Yeah. Honey, I'm going to Houston.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, that's when the flight takes off in 26 hours. It's a 6-hour flight. 6 hour round trip.
All right. Okay.
6 an hour and 15. Okay, I had
So
it wrong.
you go to
I did 26 hours. I'm like, oh,
sounds like a layover in Vegas. Honey, I'm going to Houston.
That's done on purpose.
Right.
No. You can't connect here and then leave within 24 hours.
Right, exactly.
You've got to, when you come to Vegas, you stay in Vegas.
What happens, what passes through Vegas stays in Vegas.
I read that wrong when I said 26 hours to get, that's when it leaves. The flight leaves 26 hours.
Well, it's funny because at 26 hours, if the layover's in Vegas, well, yeah.
There's no problem. 866-90 Red Eye.
This morning's USDA Farm Report is brought to you by House Products. Tested, trusted, guaranteed since 1920.
What does corn and soybean planting progress nationwide look like for the period ending April 13th? USDA meteorologist Brad Rippey.
U.S. as a whole, 4% of the U.S. intended corn acreage planted by April 13th, 1 point behind the 5-year average of 5%, 2 points behind last year at this time when we were sitting at 6% planted. Very similar picture with soybeans. 2% of the intended soybean acreage planted by April 13th, right on par with the 5-year average. 3% was our number this time a year ago.
While most Midwest states are just planting corn, Missouri already has planting underway.
Missouri coming in this week, 9% planted, a little behind the 5-year average of 12%. And then as you move to the south, we do see obviously significant progress in Texas, 63% of the corn planted there.
Similar planting trends are reported for beans as of April 13th. I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
This report brought to you by Cenex Fuels and Lubes.
We'll be right back with more Red Eye Radio with Eric Harley and Gary McNamara.
It's Red Eye Radio. He is Eric Harley, and I'm Gary McNamara. Welcome and good morning. Thanks for being here with us. Coming up following the bottom of the hour, Sarah Palin's retrial in the libel suit against the New York Times begins in the New York courts. Really interesting. I mean, she lost the last one, but apparently what happened is you had a couple of jurors that on their phones saw that the judge was talking about dismissing it.
Right.
And so that was viewed as prejudicial. So they have to start again. The judge in that case called it unfortunate editorializing. We'll tell you why we thought it rose to the level of defamation for her being a public figure coming up following the bottom of the hour. And also a lot of talk about Argentina, right? And how there has this resurgence in the economy and everything else. You know why? Because they were considered the most protectionist country in the world before the new president got in.
You're listening to Red Eye Radio from the Uniden America Studios.
It's Red Eye Radio. He is Eric Harley, and I'm Gary McNamara. Welcome and good morning. Thanks for being here. Sarah Palin is back in a Manhattan court for a retrial of her lawsuit accusing the New York Times of libeling her in a 2017 editorial. Hang on a second here. My windows are flying all over the place. My windows are automatically changing. I didn't do anything. The former Republican vice president, presidential candidate and Alaska governor, is getting a second chance at arguing that the New York Times defamed her by suggesting in an opinion piece that her campaign rhetoric inspired an assassination attempt on Arizona Representative Gabrielle Giffords 6 years earlier. A 9-person jury was selected on Monday morning in under an hour, and opening statements are expected to start Tuesday. Jurors in the first trial, by the way, this is from the New York Post, jurors at the first trial in 2022 found that the New York Times did not defame Palin, but only after several of them had seen a news alert on their phone that the judge had decided to toss the case while they were still deliberating. Manhattan Federal Court Judge Jed Rakoff found that Palin's camp had not met the high bar for proving libel against public figures, in which the media outlets are required to have published falsehoods with actual malice. The judge did criticize the Times before throwing out the case for what he called unfortunate editorializing. The jurors insisted that viewing the alerts had no impact on their deliberations, but the Second Court of Appeals ordered a new trial last August, finding that the judge had wrongly excluded evidence favorable to Palin's case. The Times editorial had been published on June 14th, 2017, after a gunman opened fire on the congressional GOP baseball team's practice, wounding then House Whip Steve Scalise and 3 others. The news outlet noted in the piece, headlined America's Lethal Politics, that Palin's Political Action Committee had published a map with stylized crosshairs over Gifford's election district before the 2011 shooting, which killed 6 people. Palin says the Time labeled her by falsely claiming there was a clear link between her campaign ad and the shooting, despite a lack of evidence that the map motivated the Arizona gunman. The Times argued throughout the trial that its editors made an honest mistake that was quickly corrected. Palin took the stand at the first trial and told jurors it was devastating to read the editorial linking her to the carnage. Now, you and I, when we read that editorial, I remember on the air that day, I remember looking at you and saying, my God, she may have a defamation lawsuit. And the malice, because she's a public figure, proving malice, and that's what hit me. If you remember that day, I looked at you and said, Eric, the malice is the fact that this happened 6 years ago, and anybody in the media knows the story. You cannot not know the story to sit there and say it was a mistake. You can't do, because that was severely the cross-examination that was done on that, where it finally came to the point where everybody agreed, no, she had nothing to do, that ad had nothing to do with the shooting. The shooter never saw it. It was talking about going after districts, targeting districts. It had nothing to do with her as an individual at all. It was about targeting districts.
By the time it hit the New York Times, I mean, we were just kind of flabbergasted. It was like, wait a minute. Are we flashing back to something, the original conversation? Are they covering the original conversation again? Because it had already been analyzed publicly, and it was like, okay, no, that was not what that was about. But yet, New York Times did the piece on it anyway.
Yeah, we were thinking that, okay, we need something to show political violence. All right, Sarah Palin, it's almost as if, for us, it's as if someone came out again and said Trump on Charlottesville said they're all good people, and he was talking about the white supremacist.
Right.
When clearly, if you read it, it didn't say that.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're saying that today, any Democrat who says that against Trump, that is malice, in my opinion, because that's been vetted. We know it's not true.
Yeah.
And so for somebody to say that today, that has been so vetted completely, where the only reason you're doing that is malice.
Right. Yeah.
You know it's false.
You had to go out of your way,
right,
in order to make that happen.
And that was our feeling then, because it was 6 years before where the assassination attempt actually happened.
Mm-hmm.
And so we said, well, everybody knows it. Anybody who's just sort of in the media knows exactly what that was about. And they claimed it was just a mistake and they forgot or just got it wrong 6 years later. It's the New York Times. Well, if I'm the publisher of the New York Times and you say it was a mistake and you don't know and you're on the editorial staff, you're fired.
Right. Yeah.
Because what they're claiming is we are completely and totally incompetent. We didn't know one of the biggest political stories of the year that every media outlet covered in specific detail. And so she may not win it, but she should, because it was malice from those editors. The editors said they made an honest mistake. Do you buy that?
I don't buy that.
I never bought it. And we said it as soon when we were reading the editorial. I said, Eric, I remember saying to you, I said, we normally don't say this because, if you're a public figure, it has to rise to the level of malice. But the way that they wrote this here, that they're going over what we all knew was debunked 6 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no way they didn't know that. They're not stupid.
Yeah, and then the first judge, they corrected it. It was just a mistake. It's like, wow. Just kind of skimmed over it. And their dismissal of it.
But here it is. Attorney David Axelrod made the argument for the New York Times in his closing statement to the Manhattan federal jury that will soon decide if the Times defamed Palin in the 2017 editorial. Axelrod said it was an honest mistake, he told the 9-person jury who started deliberating Friday afternoon. It was not a political hit piece. He then walked the panel through the timeline of the day the editorial was published, arguing that the former editorial page editor, James Bennett, and other Times employees who worked on the piece were rushed to write and edit it before the deadline that night. Jeez. Axelrod highlighted mistakes made throughout the day, including by a fact checker who missed the assertion that the 2011 shooting that wounded Representative Giffords was linked to public incitement, in part because of the map.
Yeah.
On June 14, 2017, that day the editorial was published online, Bennett edited the editorial after another writer had written the first draft of it. The editorial was written the day a gunman opened fire on the GOP members of Congress in the Northern Virginia baseball field and was supposed to discuss gun control and apparent heated political rhetoric that could have led to the shooting. I don't care what the fact checker said or whatever. Bennett or any of those editorial writers should know what the hell they're writing about. I don't care how hurried you are.
Right.
It doesn't matter how hurried you are.
Right.
That's not an excuse. Oh, it's just an honest mistake.
Yeah. Just kind of glossing over it. They said they were sorry.
Wow.
But that's the treatment of someone who at that time was prominent in the GOP. Of course that's going to be the thought. Of course that's going to be how she's treated.
Well, they're trying, to me, they're attempting to use the excuse that they're completely and totally incompetent.
Yeah.
We're just incompetent. If we're rushed, we don't get things right.
Right. Yeah.
Really interesting article here from City Journal. Judge Glock wrote it. America should learn from Argentina's failed tariff experiment. The South African nation's industries became less competitive after implementing trade barriers. This is where they were considered the biggest protectionist country in the world. They wanted to produce everything there. And it just almost destroyed the country. And Milei came in, and he's taking them all down. You know, it's sort of the same thing. Remember the Colombia Free Trade Agreement that they had with the United States? That during the 1980s, we did a free trade agreement with them where we allowed them to put tariffs on American products so they could get their industry going instead of relying on the drug industry,
Right.
the cocaine industry.
Right.
It had the opposite effect.
Yeah.
Protectionism causes inefficient companies that produce bad products when there's not competition. End of story.
Yeah.
Now, we don't know what's going to end up here in the United States. It seems as if they're backing off the Navarro position, which would be good. And they're talking about we need to get, you saw yesterday, almost everybody's saying they need to get a couple of free trade agreements done real quick, even if it's the smaller countries, to show that we're moving in the right direction. And when I saw Bessent yesterday say, the people that come forward first will get the best deal. What do you mean, get different deals? Is there only one deal to get, as you say, fair trade?
Right.
I don't know. I have no idea where they're at right now. I have no idea what the goal is of the Trump administration on tariffs because they haven't told us.
I don't think the market knows.
No, I don't. I think that's why it's sort of doing nothing right now. They're waiting for some clarity. Does the president still want equal trade with every country? By the way, they've mentioned this, that Argentina did.
Yeah. Right.
Argentina wanted free trade with every country.
Right.
So you know what happened? It means these countries had to import stuff from Argentina they didn't want, and it cost them more. They would import stuff that would cost them more, so they just tacked up the price of the cars that they sold to Argentina, so Argentina had to pay more for cars because they were trying to even it out.
Yeah, right. Well, you have J.D. Vance saying there's a good chance of a trade agreement between the U.S. and the U.K. You had the talk about China the other day, but I don't think, again, I think the market is the logical wait-and-see approach.
Well,
we'll wait and see what it ends up being.
You and I will be totally in favor if the free trade agreements are free trade.
Yeah, right.
Because it matters what's in the free trade agreement. The fact if you get an agreement, if it's free trade, then it's not what they promoted that they wanted, and we know it's not what Donald Trump actually wants.
Right.
Based on 50 years of what he said he wants, which is equal trade between every country. And you don't get that in a free trade agreement.
Right.
Whatever happens, happens.
Right. I think the bond market thing scared the daylights out of them.
I agree.
I think they're still reeling from that in terms of how they're going to work all these deals and how quickly they can. Because it's a long list. As they said, 72 nations at the door? Well, that's going to take some time. My gosh. I don't know. And also there are other things the president has to get done. So I think everybody's working on this front. I think you get all hands on deck, to see what deals could be made. We'll see what happens in the coming days.
866-90 Red Eye.
Coming up, more with Gary McNamara and Eric Harley. It's Red Eye Radio.
It's Red Eye Radio. He is Eric Harley, and I'm Gary McNamara. Wow, what a week it's going to be. I'm just reading another headline. Bill Maher warns Democrats' refusal to ditch unpopular woke issues may make them an irrelevant party. When is he going to become a Republican? Because he could be a liberal Republican now, could he not?
Probably, yeah.
When you go down with the issues, when he started talking about the issues, remember when he said why he couldn't vote Republican is because there are some people that want to put Trump on Mount Rushmore.
Yeah.
Well, that's not a reason. That's
not a reason.
What some people think has got nothing to do with the politician that you vote for.
Right. Right.
I find delusional people that are promoting things that are never going to happen on all sides.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, no, that's not going to happen.
Right.
Not going to happen. You don't vote that way. You vote for the person
right.
who's going to be in political office.
Right. As if you voted for him, then it would have happened. That actually would have been what set it in motion for him to be on Rushmore. Well, come on.
It's just,
you're not being realistic.
It was just stupid.
This is Red Eye Radio on Westwood One.